Australia, 1932. The country is in the grip of the Great Depression. Many Australian soldiers, having served in World War I, were rewarded by the government with land in the rural areas of Western Australia. These lands were supposed to be their ticket to a new life, a way to rebuild after the ravages of war. But the life of a farmer in the outback was far from easy. The soil was often poor, the weather was harsh, and the crops, mostly wheat, were barely getting by. On top of the economic hardships, a new problem arose, one that no one could have anticipated. The problem: emus, flightless birds, native to Australia, known for their speed and agility. Scene changes to a field with crops and emus. In late 1932, around 20,000 emus, migrating from inland regions to the coast during their breeding season, found themselves in the wheat-growing areas of Western Australia. The lush, cultivated fields were an irresistible source of food for these birds. To the farmers' dismay, the emus began trampling and devouring their crops. These were the very crops that farmers were relying on to survive in such tough economic times. The emus weren't just a minor nuisance, they were a disaster. The farmers, many of whom were veterans of the Great War, found themselves facing a new kind of enemy. Desperate and frustrated, they turned to the government for help. Cut to a meeting between farmers and government officials. The farmers pleaded for assistance, and the government, eager to support these former soldiers, decided to take action. But instead of a civilian solution, the response came in the form of a military operation. The government sent Major G.P.W. Meredith of the Royal Australian Artillery, along with 2 soldiers, 2 Lewis machine guns, and 10,000 rounds of ammunition, to deal with the emu problem. Cut to Major Meredith and his soldiers preparing for battle. It sounds almost absurd using military force against birds, but the situation was serious, and so was the response. The plan was simple. The soldiers would set up ambushes and use the machine guns to kill the emus, reducing their numbers and saving the crops. On November 2, 1932, the operation began. The first attempt took place near the town of Campion. Around 50 emus were spotted, and the soldiers set up their guns. But the emus, being surprisingly swift and elusive, managed to escape with minimal casualties. The soldiers quickly realized that the emus were not easy targets. The birds moved in small, scattered groups, and whenever the soldiers tried to get close enough to shoot, the emus would split up and run in different directions. The emus were fast, reaching speeds of up to 50 kilometers per hour, about 31 mph. They were also remarkably resilient. Even when hit by bullets, many of them continued to run. The soldiers found themselves struggling to keep up with the birds, and to make matters worse, the terrain was rough, and the machine guns often jammed. Scene showing soldiers struggling with the machine guns and rough terrain. As the days went on, it became clear that this was not going to be a quick or easy operation. The soldiers tried different tactics, including mounting a machine gun on a truck, in the hopes of chasing down the emus. But this plan was a disaster. The truck couldn't handle the rough ground, and the gun was almost impossible to aim while moving. The emus once again escaped unharmed. By the end of the first week, the results were dismal. Despite using thousands of rounds of ammunition, only a few hundred emus had been killed. The press got wind of the operation, and soon the newspapers were full of stories about the Great Emu War. As it came to be known, the whole situation was becoming a public relations nightmare for the government. Cut to newspapers with headlines about the Emu War. But despite the initial failures, the operation continued. Major Meredith and his men kept up their efforts, moving to different areas in an attempt to find and eliminate more emus. They had some small successes. On one occasion, they managed to kill around 100 birds in a single day. But these victories were rare, and the emus continued to outsmart and outrun the soldiers. After a few weeks, it became clear that the operation was not achieving its goals. By December 1932, the government decided to call off the military involvement. The emus had won. Officially, Around 1,000 emus were killed during the operation, but this was a tiny fraction of the total population, and it did little to reduce the damage to the crops. Scene shifts to Major Meredith giving a report on the operation. Major Meredith later commented on the toughness of the emus, saying, "If we had a military division, with the bullet-carrying capacity of these birds, it would face any army in the world. They can face machine guns with the invulnerability of tanks." The failure of the Great Emu War left the farmers in a difficult position. They continued to struggle with the emu problem, and some turned to other solutions, such as building fences to keep the birds out or enlisting bounty hunters to cull the population. Scene of farmers building fences and continuing to work their land. In the end, the Great Emu War became a bizarre footnote in Australian history, a curious event that seemed more like a comedy than a military operation. While emus, for their part, continued to thrive, and they remain a protected species in Australia today. The story of the Great Emu War is often told as a humorous reminder of how even the best laid plans can go awry when faced with the unpredictable forces of nature. But beneath the humor, it also highlights the struggles of Australian farmers during one of the toughest periods in the country's history. The emus may have won the war, but the farmers' resilience and determination to survive in the harsh Australian outback is a story of its own. Narrator. So, the next time you hear about the Great Emu War, remember it's not just a quirky tale of birds versus soldiers, but a testament to the challenges faced by those who were trying to make a life in a land that could be as unforgiving as it was beautiful.